For centuries, behind the majestic walls of the Vatican, power has been shaped not only by faith, but also by strategy, politics, and secrecy. While the world focuses on the white-robed Pope who blesses the crowds from St. Peter's Basilica, a different story unfolds in the shadows. It is a story of influence that reaches far beyond the golden altars and marble halls, a story that has fueled legends, fears, and conspiracy theories for generations. Whispers speak of a man who is not crowned, yet commands obedience, who wears no papal tiara, yet directs some of the most powerful minds in the Catholic Church. His presence is rarely seen, but his influence is said to extend across continents, into royal courts, universities, and even the highest levels of politics. To some, he represents wisdom and discipline. To others, he is the hidden hand guiding the Vatican from behind the curtain. His title is not chosen for its color, but for the power it symbolizes. He is known as the Black Pope, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, leader of the Jesuits, and for many, the most mysterious figure in the Catholic hierarchy. His story is not written in grand public ceremonies, but in quiet rooms, strategic decisions, and centuries of history that shaped the modern world. Today, we begin a journey into the heart of this mystery. We will uncover how this figure rose from the origins of a religious order to a position some believe rivals the Pope himself. We will follow the path of power, from the birth of the Jesuits in a turbulent Europe to their global influence in education, politics, and faith. This is not a tale of fiction. It is a story woven through real events, powerful individuals, and the enduring struggle between light and shadow inside one of the most influential institutions on earth. The story of the Black Pope begins not with a single man, but with an institution that would grow to become one of the most influential religious orders in history. To understand this figure, we must first look at the world that gave birth to him. In the early 16th century, Europe was in the midst of profound transformation. Old political structures were shifting. Monarchies were rising. Empires were expanding overseas. The Catholic Church, which had long been the spiritual center of Europe, was facing growing challenges from within and without. The Protestant Reformation was spreading rapidly, shaking the authority of Rome. New ideas about faith, scripture, and personal belief were spreading through printing presses and fiery sermons. The Church needed not only spiritual renewal, but also strategic action to maintain its power and influence in a changing world. It was during this turbulent period that a new order emerged, an order that would become both a sword and a shield for the Vatican. Ignatius of Loyola, a former Spanish soldier turned spiritual leader, founded the Society of Jesus in 1540. His vision was to create a disciplined, highly educated, and deeply loyal group of men who would serve the Pope directly. Unlike many other religious orders that focused primarily on monastic life, the Jesuits were structured like a military force. They took strict vows of obedience to the Pope, received rigorous intellectual training, and were sent across the globe to spread the Catholic faith, educate elites, and advise rulers. Their commitment and effectiveness quickly made them indispensable. From the beginning, the Jesuits operated with a level of organization and ambition that set them apart. They built schools and universities that trained future leaders. They traveled to distant lands, including Asia and the Americas, often acting as cultural intermediaries and political advisors. They gained access to royal courts, shaped education systems, and became trusted counselors to kings and emperors. Wherever they went, their influence grew. At the center of this growing network was a single leader known as the Superior General. He resided in Rome, near the Vatican, but his authority stretched across continents. He commanded Jesuit missions in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Through detailed correspondence, he issued orders, received reports, and coordinated strategies that aligned the global mission of the Jesuits with the goals of the Catholic Church. His position required strategic intelligence, spiritual leadership, and political skill. Over time, people began to refer to this powerful figure as the Black Pope. The title had nothing to do with his skin color or official robes. It symbolized his authority and the black cassock traditionally worn by members of the Jesuit Order. The Jesuits quickly became known for their loyalty to the Pope, but their effectiveness also meant that their leader held a kind of centralized power unmatched by other religious groups. While the Pope was the public face of the Church, addressing crowds from balconies and issuing encyclicals, the Superior General worked behind the scenes. He oversaw a network of schools, missions, and advisors who shaped the hearts and minds of future generations. As their influence expanded, so did suspicion and fear. Some European rulers began to see the Jesuits not only as religious emissaries, but as political operatives. Their ability to move across borders, gain the trust of leaders, and shape policy made them both admired and distrusted. Rumors began to circulate that the Superior General, the Black Pope, was the true power behind the Vatican, a figure whose authority operated in the shadows, quietly guiding events. The early years of the Society of Jesus laid the foundation for this perception. The Jesuits' dedication to education and strategy positioned them uniquely within both the Church and the secular world. Their network became so extensive that their presence could be felt from Paris to Beijing. Jesuit mathematicians advised Chinese emperors. Jesuit theologians debated Protestant reformers in Europe. Jesuit teachers educated the sons of kings and nobles who would one day rule entire nations. Inside the Vatican, the Superior General became a crucial ally to the Pope. His order defended the Church against Protestant challenges, expanded Catholic influence in new territories, and reinforced the authority of Rome. Yet the independence and organization of the Jesuits also meant that the Pope relied on them in ways that sometimes shifted the balance of power. The Black Pope was not a rival in name, but in function his role could seem almost parallel to that of the Pope himself. By the end of the 16th century, the Jesuits had grown into a force that shaped global politics, education, and religion. Their Superior General had become a man whose signature carried weight across continents. To some, he was a brilliant strategist and a guardian of the faith. To others, he was a shadowy figure whose reach extended too far. This tension between admiration and suspicion would define the Jesuits' relationship with both rulers and the Vatican for centuries to come. This is where the mystery of the Black Pope begins to take shape. Not as a fictional villain, but as a real historical figure whose power grew quietly through networks of loyalty, intellect, and unwavering discipline. His story is inseparable from the story of the Jesuits themselves, and in the centuries that followed, his role would become even more controversial and influential. As the 16th century moved forward, the Jesuits solidified their position as one of the most dynamic forces within the Catholic Church. Their growth was rapid, almost unprecedented. In just a few decades after their founding, the Society of Jesus had spread across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The world was entering a period of exploration, colonization, and religious competition. The Jesuits placed themselves at the center of this global transformation, acting as educators, missionaries, diplomats, and advisors. At the heart of their operations stood the Superior General in Rome, a leader whose strategic vision guided the order like a general directing a worldwide army. The Jesuits were unlike any other religious group of their time. Their formation required years of rigorous education, not only in theology, but also in philosophy, languages, mathematics, and science. This intellectual foundation allowed them to engage with scholars, rulers, and thinkers across different cultures. They entered royal courts as confessors and advisors, influencing decisions that shaped the destiny of nations. Their schools produced future kings, ministers, and intellectual leaders who would carry Jesuit values and loyalty into their adult lives. This made the order an invisible yet powerful thread woven into the fabric of European political life. Ignatius of Loyola had designed the Jesuit structure with military precision. Members of the order were expected to obey their superiors without hesitation. Every Jesuit was part of a carefully planned hierarchy that reported ultimately to the Superior General. From the beginning, communication was key. Letters traveled from missions in faraway lands to Rome, describing local situations in detail. Instructions then flowed back from the Superior General, ensuring that every Jesuit mission remained connected to the center. This global correspondence created a network that allowed the order to act in unison despite the vast distances separating its members. Europe during this time was a continent of shifting alliances and power struggles. Monarchies were expanding their territories overseas, competing for influence in the Americas and Asia. Religious divisions deepened as Protestant movements gained strength, challenging Catholic dominance in regions like Germany, England, and the Netherlands. The Jesuits were at the forefront of the Counter-Reformation, working to reinforce Catholic authority through education, preaching, and direct involvement in political affairs. Their ability to adapt to different cultural and political environments gave them a unique advantage. In Spain and Portugal, Jesuit missionaries boarded ships bound for distant colonies, establishing schools and missions in places like Brazil, India, and Japan. In France, they advised royal courts and worked to strengthen Catholic identity amid religious wars. In the Holy Roman Empire, they became influential educators, shaping the minds of the elites who would govern Central Europe. Their adaptability made them indispensable to Catholic rulers who saw them as both spiritual allies and skilled strategists. The Superior General's authority grew with each new mission. He appointed provincial leaders, approved strategic initiatives, and ensured that Jesuit activities supported both the Catholic Church and the order's internal goals. While the Pope remained the supreme spiritual head of the Church, the Superior General managed a global institution that operated with remarkable independence. This duality of loyalty and autonomy set the stage for centuries of both cooperation and tension between the papacy and the Jesuits. By the late 16th century, Jesuit influence had become deeply embedded in the political structures of Europe. In many royal courts, confessors to kings were Jesuits. They heard the private thoughts of monarchs, advised on moral and political issues, and shaped decisions behind closed doors. Their role in education gave them long-term influence, as generations of rulers and advisors passed through Jesuit schools. Even in Protestant territories, their intellectual rigor commanded respect. Many of Europe's most significant debates on science, philosophy, and theology involved Jesuit scholars. The growing power of the Jesuits did not go unnoticed. Some rulers welcomed their advice and expertise, viewing them as essential allies in maintaining religious and political stability. Others grew uneasy, suspecting that their loyalty to the Pope and their own Superior General could conflict with national interests. These suspicions gave rise to early fears that the Jesuits were more than just priests and teachers. Whispers spread that they were political agents operating under a centralized command, capable of influencing rulers and shaping empires from behind the scenes. Within the Vatican, The relationship between the Pope and the Superior General remained complex. The Jesuits had sworn absolute obedience to the Pope, yet their sophisticated organization meant they did not rely on the Vatican for their operations in the same way other religious orders did. The Superior General commanded resources, personnel, and intelligence that often rivaled those of entire states. His authority was spiritual, but also strategic. He became a figure whose power was exercised quietly but effectively. A man who could direct global initiatives from his headquarters in Rome. This structure gave rise to the image of the Black Pope as a hidden power, a man whose black robes symbolized both his Jesuit identity and his role in the shadows. While the white-robed Pope addressed the faithful from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the Black Pope worked through a network of men scattered across continents. His influence was not displayed in grand ceremonies, but in decisions made in private chambers, in letters sent across oceans, and in the loyalty of thousands. As the 17th century unfolded, the Jesuits became more deeply woven into the fabric of global power. They were no longer simply missionaries or educators. They had become political players, cultural intermediaries, and strategic advisors operating at the highest levels of empires. Their missions stretched from the courts of Europe to the royal palaces of Asia and the colonies of the New World. At the center of this sprawling network stood the Superior General in Rome, whose influence now extended over vast distances. In Europe, the Jesuits held significant sway in the Spanish and Portuguese empires. These two Catholic powers dominated overseas expansion, and Jesuit missionaries traveled alongside explorers and colonial administrators. In South America, they established missions that were both religious and social experiments. They organized communities among indigenous peoples, teaching them European agriculture, crafts, and Christianity. Some of these missions became remarkably prosperous and independent, demonstrating the Jesuits' ability to build structured societies in remote regions. In Asia, the Jesuits achieved extraordinary levels of access to powerful courts. In China, figures such as Matteo Ricci gained the trust of the Ming dynasty by mastering Chinese language and culture. Jesuit astronomers and mathematicians introduced European scientific knowledge, becoming advisors to the imperial court. They helped reform the Chinese calendar and participated in intellectual debates with Confucian scholars. In Japan, before Christianity was outlawed, Jesuits were influential in spreading the faith and establishing educational institutions. These missions were not merely religious endeavors. They represented a sophisticated blend of cultural diplomacy, science, and political strategy, all guided from Rome by the Superior General. In Europe itself, the Jesuits became key actors in major political events. They advised monarchs like the kings of France and Spain, often serving as confessors who held deep personal insight into royal affairs. Their schools produced generations of influential statesmen, clergy, and military leaders. Jesuit scholars defended Catholic doctrine in debates with Protestant reformers, strengthening the Catholic Church's intellectual position. Through their role in education and political advising, they gained a level of influence that often rivaled that of high-ranking nobles and bishops. However, their growing presence also led to increasing suspicion and opposition. In Protestant countries, Jesuits were viewed as dangerous agents of Rome, accused of plotting against governments and spreading Catholic influence through covert means. In England, for example, fears of Jesuit conspiracies were widespread, especially during moments of political tension. In Catholic countries, some secular rulers grew wary of the order's independence. The Jesuits reported primarily to their Superior General, and through him, to the Pope, which sometimes placed them outside the direct control of local monarchies. This independence was both their strength and their vulnerability. It allowed them to operate efficiently on a global scale, but it also made them a target for those who saw centralized Jesuit power as a threat to national sovereignty. The Black Pope, as Superior General, was increasingly portrayed by critics as a figure who could direct an international network that answered to no king. In times of political crisis, this image could quickly turn the order into a convenient scapegoat. Tensions came to a head during events like the 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict that tore Europe apart from 1618 to 1648. The war was both political and religious, involving Protestant and Catholic powers in a struggle that reshaped the continent. Jesuits were deeply involved in the Catholic response, advising rulers, supporting armies through spiritual guidance, and working to maintain Catholic influence in contested territories. Their presence in royal courts and their role in shaping policies made them powerful allies, but also controversial figures. Opponents accused them of manipulating politics behind the scenes, while supporters saw them as essential defenders of the faith. In Latin America, Jesuit missions grew into semi-autonomous communities known as reductions. These settlements were organized with remarkable efficiency, blending European administrative models with indigenous traditions. Jesuits acted as both religious leaders and civic organizers, protecting indigenous populations from exploitation by colonial authorities. Some reductions became economically prosperous and militarily capable, even forming militias to defend against slave raids. While these communities were admired by some European observers, others saw them as evidence that the Jesuits were creating their own independent power base, far from the control of kings and colonial governors. The global reach of the Jesuits made the role of the Superior General increasingly complex. He had to manage delicate political relationships with multiple empires, maintain the loyalty of his members, and align the order's actions with the objectives of the Catholic Church. This required extraordinary strategic skill. Letters from across the world arrived in Rome, reporting on local developments and seeking instructions. From his headquarters, the Superior General issued detailed directives, balancing missionary goals with political realities. By the mid-17th century, the Jesuits had become indispensable to many rulers, but also deeply distrusted by others. Their reputation varied dramatically depending on who was telling the story. To Catholic monarchs who relied on their education systems and advice, they were loyal servants of both God and King. To Protestant leaders and suspicious Catholics, they were agents of an international power that operated beyond national control. The image of the Black Pope continued to evolve during this period. He was no longer seen merely as the head of a religious order. In the eyes of both supporters and critics, he had become a figure who could influence global politics through his command of a disciplined, intelligent, and far-reaching organization. The Jesuit network acted like a global nervous system, transmitting information and instructions across continents with remarkable speed for its time. This ability to coordinate actions from a single center gave the Superior General an aura of almost unseen authority. As the century came to a close, cracks began to form in the Jesuits' political relationships. National rivalries, colonial competition, and growing tensions between church and state would eventually bring their influence under attack. For now, though, their power was at its height. The Black Pope stood as the strategic leader of a network that touched every corner of the known world, admired by some, feared by others, and watched closely by kings and popes alike.
By the 18th century, the Jesuits had reached both the height of their influence and the brink of their greatest crisis. Their global network was vast, their intellectual reputation unmatched, and their political connections deeply rooted in multiple empires. Yet the very factors that had enabled their success began to turn against them. National governments, grew increasingly wary of the order's autonomy. Enlightenment thinkers challenged the authority of the Church, and rulers sought to assert greater control over religious institutions within their territories. The Jesuits, with their loyalty to the Pope and their powerful Superior General in Rome, were increasingly seen as an obstacle to emerging ideas of centralized national sovereignty across Europe. Monarchs began to question whether the Jesuits were serving the interests of their countries or their own international agenda. The Superior General's ability to command Jesuits across national borders was perceived by some rulers as a direct challenge to their authority. The Jesuits had become confessors to kings, educators of elites, and advisors in court politics, and their missions overseas often operated with considerable independence. This combination of global reach and centralized control fed a growing suspicion that the order was a power unto itself. In Portugal, tensions reached a breaking point first. The Marquis of Pombal, a powerful minister under King Joseph I, was determined to modernize the country and reduce the influence of the Church. He saw the Jesuits as obstacles to his reforms. When a failed assassination attempt against the king in 1758 was blamed on the Jesuits, Pombal acted decisively. Jesuits were arrested, expelled, and their properties confiscated. Portuguese missions in South America were dismantled, and their members were shipped back to Europe in chains. The expulsion marked the beginning of a wave of anti-Jesuit actions across the continent. France followed soon after. The French monarchy, influenced by Enlightenment ideas and political pressures, began to view the Jesuits as politically inconvenient. Their influence in education and their ties to Rome were seen as threats to royal authority. French courts accused the order of economic mismanagement and political intrigue, and in 1764 the Jesuits were officially suppressed in France. Their schools were closed, their properties seized, and their members forced to disband or go underground. Spain and its colonies joined the movement shortly afterward. King Charles III, seeking to strengthen his control over the Spanish Empire, ordered the expulsion of the Jesuits in 1767 in a single coordinated operation. Jesuits were arrested across Spanish territories, including in the Americas, and deported to Italy. Thousands of men who had spent their lives building missions, schools, and communities were suddenly uprooted. Their missions in South America, particularly the reductions in Paraguay, were dissolved. These communities had been among the most successful experiments in Jesuit social organization, and their destruction marked a significant blow to the order's prestige. The cumulative effect of these expulsions placed immense pressure on the Vatican. European monarchs, many of whom had once relied on Jesuit education and diplomacy, now demanded that the Pope act against the order. They argued that the Jesuits had become too powerful, too independent, and too resistant to royal control. In this climate of political maneuvering, Pope Clement XIV faced a difficult decision. His position was weakened by the combined influence of the Bourbon monarchies of France, Spain, Naples, and Portugal, all of whom demanded the suppression of the Jesuits in 1773. After years of mounting pressure, Clement XIV issued the papal brief, Dominus AC, formally suppressing the Society of Jesus, the order that had once been the spearhead of Catholic influence across the world was dissolved. Jesuit properties were confiscated, their schools were closed, and their members were dispersed. Some joined other religious orders, others lived quietly in exile, and many continued their intellectual and spiritual work in secret. The Superior General's office was abolished, and the position of the Black Pope ceased to exist. At least officially, the suppression of the Jesuits was one of the most dramatic events in the history of the Catholic Church. It reflected not only political hostility, but also the changing intellectual climate of Europe. Enlightenment thinkers promoted reason and secular governance, challenging traditional religious authority. Monarchs were consolidating power, seeking to bring the Church under tighter state control. The Jesuits, with their international network and allegiance to Rome, represented an old model of authority that many rulers no longer tolerated. Yet the story did not end with suppression. Even in this period of crisis, the Jesuit spirit endured. In territories where the papal decree was not enforced, such as Russia and Prussia, the order survived in a limited form. Empress Catherine the Great of Russia, despite being Orthodox, valued the Jesuits' educational expertise and refused to allow the papal brief to be promulgated in her realm. As a result, Jesuit institutions continued to function there, preserving their traditions and organizational structure. This unexpected refuge became crucial for the future revival of the order. Throughout this time, former Jesuits maintained contact, shared intellectual work, and awaited the possibility of restoration. The idea of the Black Pope as a figure of power faded from public view, replaced by the image of a once mighty order brought low by political forces. However, within this apparent defeat lay the seeds of renewal. The Jesuit network, though officially dismantled, had been built over centuries with resilience and discipline. Its members retained their education, their loyalty, and their sense of mission in 1814. After the upheavals of the Napoleonic era, Pope Pius VII officially restored the Society of Jesus. The world had changed dramatically since their suppression, but the Church now faced new challenges that required capable and disciplined allies. The Jesuits were reinstated with their previous privileges, and the office of the Superior General was re-established. Once again, a Black Pope would lead the order from Rome, guiding its missions and strategies. The Restoration marked a remarkable comeback. After 4 decades of suppression, the Jesuits returned to their role as educators, missionaries, and intellectual leaders. They rebuilt their institutions, reopened schools, and resumed their global activities. The Black Pope, now at the head of a revitalized order, inherited both the legacy of their past power and the lessons of their fall. The world he faced was no longer the same Europe of the Counter-Reformation. It was a world shaped by revolutions, Enlightenment ideals, and new political realities. Story of their suppression and revival added new layers to the image of the Black Pope. He was no longer seen merely as a powerful figure in the shadows, but also as the leader of an order that had survived one of the greatest political storms in church history. The Jesuits emerged from this ordeal both humbled and strengthened, ready to adapt their strategies to a rapidly changing world. The 19th century marked a new chapter for the Jesuits and for the figure of the Black Pope. After decades of suppression, the Society of Jesus was restored into a world that had been transformed by revolution, industrialization, and political upheaval. The European monarchies that had once expelled the order were now grappling with new ideologies, growing secularism, and changing social structures. The Catholic Church itself faced challenges from both modern, intellectual movements and newly emerging nation-states that sought to limit its influence. In this environment, the Jesuits had to redefine their mission while maintaining their distinctive identity. The restored society focused its initial efforts on rebuilding its educational institutions. Jesuit schools and universities had once been some of the most prestigious centers of learning in Europe and the colonies. After Restoration, the order rapidly reopened colleges, founded new universities, and re-established its intellectual presence. Education remained the backbone of Jesuit strategy, a means of shaping minds and influencing societies for generations to come. The Superior General directed these efforts from Rome, overseeing a network that once again spanned continents. Unlike in previous centuries, the Jesuits could not rely on the same level of political favor or protection from Catholic monarchs. Many European governments were increasingly secular and suspicious of church influence. The Superior General had to navigate a world where the Church no longer held unquestioned authority over politics and education. This required strategic adaptation. Jesuit schools continued to emphasize intellectual rigor and moral formation, but they also engaged with the modern sciences, literature, and philosophy to remain relevant in a rapidly modernizing world. The 19th century also saw the Jesuits expand their presence in regions where Catholicism was growing, particularly in North America. As waves of European immigrants arrived in the United States, many of them Catholic, the Jesuits established colleges and universities to serve the growing population. Institutions such as Georgetown University and Boston College became influential centers of Catholic education, helping to shape the identity of the Church. In a nation built on principles of religious freedom and pluralism, the role of the Black Pope evolved during this time. The Superior General remained the central authority of the order, but his influence operated less through royal courts and more through education, intellectual leadership, and missionary expansion. The Jesuit network adapted to new political realities by working within democratic systems and secular societies rather than relying on royal patronage. This shift required careful strategy to preserve their autonomy while cooperating with modern states. As the century progressed, new political forces emerged that once again put the Jesuits under scrutiny. The revolutions of 1848, the unification of Italy, and the rise of liberal governments across Europe created environments that were often hostile to religious orders. In Italy, the unification process resulted in the loss of the Papal States, weakening the temporal power of the Pope and forcing the Church to adapt to a new political landscape. In countries like Germany, the Kulturkampf policies of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck sought to limit the influence of the Catholic Church, leading to the expulsion of Jesuits from German territories in the 1870s. Throughout these challenges, the Jesuits maintained their organizational discipline and global perspective. The Superior General coordinated responses to political pressures, relocated personnel when necessary, and focused on areas where the order could continue its work without interference. Missions in Asia, Africa, and the Americas became increasingly important as Europe's political climate grew more restrictive. Jesuit missionaries traveled to regions undergoing colonization, often acting as educators and cultural intermediaries, similar to their role in earlier centuries, but now within a different geopolitical framework. In addition to education and missionary work, the Jesuits became deeply involved in intellectual and theological debates. The 19th century was a period of rapid scientific advancement and philosophical change. The Church faced new challenges from secular ideologies, rationalism, and emerging theories such as Darwinian evolution. Jesuit scholars engaged in these debates through academic journals, universities, and public discourse. Their training in philosophy and science positioned them as defenders of Catholic intellectual tradition while also encouraging dialogue with modern thought. The Black Pope's influence during this period was more subtle than in the age of kings and empires. The The Superior General directed a global organization that operated in diverse political contexts. In some places, Jesuits were seen as trusted educators and moral guides. In others, they were viewed with suspicion, accused of trying to restore papal influence in secular states. This dual image persisted, much as it had in earlier centuries, but the mechanisms of power had changed. Rather than influencing monarchs directly, the Jesuits shaped societies through schools, universities, missionary networks, and intellectual engagement as the world entered the 20th century. The Jesuits were once again a formidable force within the Catholic Church. Their schools educated hundreds of thousands of students across continents. Their missionaries worked in some of the most remote parts of the globe. Their scholars contributed to theological debates that would shape modern Catholic thought. The Superior General oversaw all of this from Rome, ensuring that the order remained unified despite its vast scope. The 20th century, however, would bring new and unprecedented challenges. The world was about to be shaken by two global wars, the rise of totalitarian regimes, and the rapid spread of new political ideologies. The Catholic Church itself would undergo transformative changes through the Second Vatican Council. In this shifting landscape, the role of the Black Pope would take on new dimensions, balancing tradition and adaptation in a century defined by conflict and change. The Jesuits entered this era with centuries of experience in navigating power, politics, and faith. Their past had been marked by both extraordinary influence and dramatic suppression. Now, under the guidance of the Superior General, they faced the task of remaining relevant in a world where power was no longer concentrated in monarchies or empires, but in nations' ideologies and increasingly global forces. The story of the Black Pope was moving into a modern age where old strategies would need to be yet the core of the Order's mission remained the same: to educate, to serve, and to influence the world through disciplined action and unwavering loyalty to their purpose. As the 20th century unfolded, the role of the Black Pope evolved once again. The world was entering an era of total war, ideological conflict, and unprecedented global transformation. The Jesuits had survived monarchies, revolutions, and suppressions, but now they faced the challenge of navigating a modern world shaped by nation-states, mass media, and new political ideologies. The superior generals who led the society during this period became central figures in shaping the identity of the Jesuits in a changing church and a rapidly shifting world. One of the most influential superiors general of the early 20th century was Władimir Lidachowski. Born into a noble Polish family, he became the 26th Superior General in 1915, just as the First World War was devastating Europe. His leadership spanned 3 decades, through both world wars and the rise of totalitarian regimes. Lidachowski guided the order during some of the most turbulent years in modern history. Under his direction, the Jesuits strengthened their educational institutions and missionary work, but they also became involved in intellectual and ideological struggles. During his tenure, the world witnessed the collapse of empires, the rise of fascism and communism, and the beginning of global ideological polarization. Lidachowski was deeply concerned with the rise of communism and saw the Jesuits as defenders of the Church against atheistic ideologies. He supported intellectual engagement to counter these movements and encouraged Jesuits to enter fields of journalism, philosophy, and education to confront new cultural and political challenges. His leadership style was strict and centralized, maintaining strong control over the global order during a period when unity was essential for survival. The Second World War posed moral and strategic dilemmas for the Jesuits. In occupied territories, many Jesuits faced persecution, while others worked quietly to protect civilians, resist totalitarian regimes, or maintain the continuity of their missions. In Germany and occupied Europe, several Jesuits participated in resistance activities against the Nazi regime, risking their lives to uphold their moral principles. In other regions, they struggled to navigate the complexities of wartime politics while remaining faithful to their mission. Lidichowski himself was based in Rome during the war, operating in a city surrounded by fascist Italy and later occupied by Nazi Germany. His ability to maintain communication with Jesuit provinces worldwide under these conditions demonstrated the organizational resilience of the order. After the war, the Church entered a period of reflection and adaptation. The world had changed dramatically. Colonial empires were collapsing, new nations were emerging, and the ideological confrontation between the capitalist West and the communist East was reshaping global politics. In this new landscape, the Jesuits faced questions about their identity, their relationship with modern culture, and their role in a changing church. In 1946, Jean-Baptiste Janssens became the new Superior General. He led the society through the early years of the Cold War and the preparations for the Second Vatican Council. Janssens focused on promoting internal renewal within the order and strengthening its missionary work in the post-war world. He recognized that the Jesuits could no longer operate as they had in the age of colonial missions and European dominance. The order needed to adapt to a world of newly independent nations and increasingly global communication. The Second Vatican Council, held between 1962 and 1965, represented one of the most significant transformations in the modern Catholic Church. It sought to engage with the modern world, reform church practices, and encourage dialogue with other faiths and cultures. During this period, Pedro Arup, a Spanish Jesuit who had served as a missionary in Japan, emerged as a key figure. In 1965, he was elected Superior General, marking the beginning of one of the most transformative periods in Jesuit history. Pedro Arup brought a new vision to the role of the Black Pope. He emphasized social justice, engagement with contemporary issues, and the importance of adapting the Jesuit mission to modern realities. Arup believed that the Jesuits should not only educate elites, but also work directly with marginalized communities, advocating for human rights and social transformation. His leadership coincided with a period of global upheaval, including the civil rights movement, decolonization, and social revolutions across continents. Arup encouraged Jesuits to immerse themselves in the realities of the modern world. Many Jesuits became active in social movements, working with the poor, supporting liberation theology in Latin America, and engaging in interfaith dialogue. This shift brought both admiration and controversy. Some within the Church viewed Arup's direction as a necessary adaptation to modern times. Others, particularly conservative factions, saw it as too radical. ROP maintained his commitment to the core Jesuit mission of service, education, and loyalty to the Church. But he understood that the world had changed and that the order needed to change with it. During his leadership, the society faced growing internal diversity of thought. Some Jesuits embraced progressive theological positions, while others held to traditional views. Arup worked to maintain unity in this complex environment. His relationship with Pope John Paul II was complex as well. The Pope admired Arup's dedication, but was cautious about the more radical elements within the order. In 1981, after Erup suffered a stroke, John Paul II appointed a personal delegate to oversee the society, an unprecedented move that signaled the Pope's concern about the direction of the order. In 1983, Peter Haynes Kolvenbach was elected Superior General. A Dutch Jesuit and a skilled linguist, Kolvenbach brought a stabilizing influence to the order after the intense and sometimes polarizing years of Arup's leadership. His approach emphasized dialogue, intellectual engagement, and collaboration with the wider church. He worked to rebuild trust between the Jesuits and the Vatican while continuing to support the order's commitment to social justice and education. Kolvenbach's tenure lasted until 2008, making him one of the longest-serving superiors general in modern times. During Kolvenbach's leadership, the world witnessed the end of the Cold War, the rise of globalization, and the rapid expansion of new technologies. The Jesuits expanded their educational and social missions globally, establishing new universities, research centers, and social initiatives. They continued to play a major role in theological debates, intellectual life, and cultural engagement, often bridging gaps between faith and modernity. Kolvenbach's diplomatic leadership helped the order maintain its global presence while preserving its identity in a rapidly changing church. In 2008, Adolfo Nicolás, a Spanish Jesuit, became Superior General. He emphasized spiritual depth and intellectual engagement in a globalized world. His leadership coincided with major changes in the Catholic Church, including the papacy of Benedict XVI and later Francis. The first Jesuit Pope, Nicholas, focused on humility, simplicity, and renewed spiritual vitality. Under his leadership, the order sought to deepen its commitment to faith and justice while remaining engaged with modern culture. In 2016, Arturo Sosa, a Venezuelan Jesuit, was elected Superior General, becoming the first Latin American to hold the position. His leadership represents a new chapter in the history of the Black Pope. Sosa emphasizes global perspectives, intercultural dialogue, and the Jesuit mission in the context of 21st century challenges. He leads an order that operates in more than 100 countries, running schools, universities, and social institutions, and engaging with issues ranging from migration and environmental justice to digital culture and interreligious dialogue. Through these leaders, the figure of the Black Pope has remained a symbol of strategic vision and global influence within the Catholic Church. While the mechanisms of power have changed, the role continues to shape the direction of the largest religious order in the world. The Superior General no longer commands armies of missionaries in colonial empires, but he oversees a vast network of educators, intellectuals, and activists who influence culture, politics, and faith on a global scale. The story of the Black Pope in the modern era is not one of secrecy in dark rooms, but of leadership in an interconnected world. It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and enduring influence. From the Warszawski's centralized control during wartime to Arup's transformative social vision and Sosa's global leadership in the digital age, each Superior General has carried forward the legacy of a role that has shaped history for nearly 5 centuries. Across the centuries, the figure known as the Black Pope has stood at the intersection of faith, strategy, and power. From the early days of the Jesuit Order in a fractured Europe to the globalized world of the 21st century, the Superior General has played a unique and often misunderstood role within the Catholic Church. While the white-robed Pope has always represented the visible authority of the Church, the Black Pope has symbolized its disciplined intellect, strategic vision, an ability to influence events far beyond the Vatican's walls. The story of this figure is inseparable from the history of the Jesuit Order itself. Founded in a time of religious upheaval, the Jesuits became the intellectual and missionary vanguard of the Catholic Church. Under the guidance of their superior generals, they spread across continents, built schools, advised kings, and engaged in cultural encounters that shaped entire civilizations. They were educators, diplomats, missionaries, and sometimes political actors. Their reach extended from European courts to the farthest corners of Asia and the Americas. Their structure, modeled with military precision, allowed them to act with unity and purpose even in the most hostile environments. The Black Pope's power has always been subtle rather than overt. He does not command armies or issue papal decrees. Instead, he directs an organization that shapes minds and influences societies through education, moral guidance, and strategic presence. Throughout history, this influence has been perceived in different ways. To some, the Jesuits were defenders of the faith, bringing education, spiritual formation, and intellectual depth to societies around the world. To others, they were a secretive force working behind the scenes to extend Vatican influence. This dual image has fueled both admiration and suspicion, giving rise to countless legends and conspiracy theories. What makes the story of the Black Pope so compelling is the way it mirrors broader historical changes. In the age of monarchies, the Superior General advised rulers and shaped policy through direct counsel. In the colonial era, Jesuit missionaries and scholars became cultural intermediaries, adapting their message to different civilizations while maintaining loyalty to Rome. In the age of revolutions and secular governments, the Jesuits shifted their strategy toward education and intellectual engagement. In the modern era, their influence has taken on new forms. Operating through global networks of universities, social initiatives, and interreligious dialogue, the superior generals themselves have reflected these changes. Early figures like Ignatius of Loyola and Claudio Acquaviva built the foundations of a disciplined, globally oriented order. Leaders of the 19th century navigated the challenges of secular states and political upheaval. 20th century superiors such as Lidichesky and Kolvenbach each embodied different responses to modernity, from centralized authority in times of war to visionary engagement with social issues and intellectual culture. Arturo Sosa today leads the order in a world connected by technology, shaped by global migration, and facing unprecedented cultural and environmental challenges. Despite these transformations, one element remains constant. The Black Pope represents a form of leadership that is strategic, intellectual, and deeply embedded in global structures. His power is not theatrical but enduring, built through centuries of education, organization, and presence. While the papacy embodies the spiritual and symbolic authority of the Church, the Superior General embodies its capacity to act, to think, and to adapt. The Vatican itself has long understood the value of this duality. The Pope and the Black Pope do not stand in opposition, but in a complex relationship that reflects the multifaceted nature of the Church. One inspires the faithful through public leadership, rituals, and doctrine. The other ensures that the Church remains intellectually vibrant, strategically positioned, and globally active. This dynamic has allowed the Catholic Church to endure crises, confront changing times, and continue its mission across vastly different historical contexts. Outside observers have often been fascinated by this arrangement. The title Black Pope has given rise to a sense of mystery, as if there were a hidden ruler behind the throne. In reality, the power of the Superior General lies not in secret domination, but in the ability to lead one of the most effective and enduring organizations in human history. Through education, diplomacy, and cultural engagement, the Jesuits have influenced generations, shaping societies in ways that are both visible and invisible. Today, the Jesuit Order operates in more than 100 countries. They run some of the world's most respected educational institutions, engage in humanitarian work, conduct research, and participate in cultural and intellectual debates. Their global network allows them to respond quickly to social and spiritual needs. The Superior General coordinates this vast enterprise from Rome, continuing a tradition that began nearly 5 centuries ago. As the 21st century unfolds, the challenges facing the Church and the world are profound. Secularization, technological change, political instability, and cultural fragmentation create an environment unlike any before. In this context, the role of the Black Pope continues to evolve. His leadership is less about controlling events and more about guiding a complex global network to remain relevant, faithful, and influential. The story of the Black Pope is not simply a tale of hidden power. It is a story of vision, adaptation, and the enduring capacity of ideas and institutions to shape history. It is about the tension between what is seen and what is unseen, between spiritual authority and strategic influence. It is about how a single role, defined centuries ago, continues to shape one of the most influential organizations on earth. As long as the Jesuit Order exists, the figure of the Black Pope will continue to fascinate, inspire, and provoke curiosity. Whether viewed as a strategic leader, a spiritual guide, or a mysterious power behind the scenes, his influence is undeniable. It stretches across continents, through centuries, and into the very fabric of modern history. And while the world changes, the legacy of this unique role remains a reminder that true power often lies not in the spotlight, but in the enduring structures that shape minds, societies, and the course of history itself.
As our journey comes to a close, the shadows within the Vatican remind us that history is never as simple as it seems. Power takes many forms. Some are crowned and celebrated in the light. Others are shaped quietly through strategy, discipline, and centuries of influence. The figure of the Black Pope stands as a living reminder of this hidden dimension. Here at Forbidden Lore, we explore the stories that lie beneath the surface, the forgotten forces and secret structures that have shaped our world. If this story has captured your curiosity, there is much more waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe and join us as we continue to explore the mysteries that history tried to keep in the dark. Because sometimes, the most powerful truths are not written in plain sight. They are hidden, waiting for those willing to look a little deeper.